Tonight, I'm kind of excited because I want to talk about one of the most unique characters, certainly in the Old Testament, if not the entire Bible. He is unique because on the surface, he appeared to be a genuine servant of God. I mean, he believed in God. He had at least some desire to please God. He spoke directly to God and vice versa on several occasions, and he was a prophet of God. The one I'm talking about is named Balaam. Balaam, B-A-L-A-A-M. Yet, just as all that glitters is not necessarily gold, this man's glittering attributes were deceiving. That is, in the end, his negative attributes outweighed the positive by a long shot. So we're going to be looking at him tonight, next Sunday night, and maybe even one additional Sunday night beyond. But the reason I want to look at this man is not only is he a fascinating character to study, but he teaches us some very, very important lessons in terms of obedience to God and our attitude toward God's will. So if you would, turn your Bibles to the book of Numbers, Old Testament book of Numbers, the 22nd chapter, Numbers 22, and I'll begin at verse 1. At this point in history, the Israelites are just beginning. Well, not beginning. They're on the verge of entering the promised land, which was not good for the inhabitants on either side of the Jordan River. Numbers 22, starting at verse 1. Then the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, and he was the king of the Moabites, by the way, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. In fact, Israel had routed them. We read about that back in the 21st chapter. And by the way, the Israelites really did not intend to conquer nations on the way to the promised land, but they had to go through some of the territory possessed by these nations. They even asked permission to go through, but they were always refused, and they had no choice then, because those other nations would decide, well, we're going to fight you, before we let you go through our land, and God will allow the Israelites to prevail without exception. All right, continuing. And Moab, that is the people, were exceedingly afraid of the people, the Israelites, because they were many. And Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel. Verse 4. So Moab, probably now referring to the king, said to the elders of Midian, the officials of the land, now this company will lick up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak, the king, son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. So in talking to them about this, they apparently sat down and tried to figure out what to do. So they came up with a plan that involved, well, I don't want to call him a hero because he wasn't really a hero. We'll call him the flawed hero of our story, going to verse 5. Then he, the king Balak, sent messengers to Balaam. That's the subject of our study, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, look, a people has come from Egypt. This, of course, is Israel. See, they cover the face of the earth and are settling next to me. Now, he was mistaken. They weren't settling there. They were just moving through. They're camping there temporarily until they could make plans based on God's instructions on when to cross the Jordan River, how to cross the Jordan River, and what to do after that. But they think, oh, the people are settling right here on this side of the Jordan. They're going to take us all out. Therefore, again, the message to Balaam, please come at once, curse this people from me. You see, where they send for Balaam, he's quite a distance away. He's nowhere near this territory. Curse the people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know, this is very interesting, I know that he whom you bless is blessed. and he whom you curse is cursed. Balaam acquired quite a reputation at this point in time, and not without good reason. God apparently used him, empowered him to curse certain nations or individuals for God's purpose, and bless certain nations or individuals for God's purposes, and it came out exactly as he would do or say or pronounce because God allowed that to happen. The problem was Balaam, because of this reputation, it gives us the hint, apparently gave the impression that he could manipulate or personally steer the curses or the blessings in whatever direction he personally desired. Now, that was not true. But you know, once you get a reputation, once you get a little fame, sometimes you want to kind of exaggerate it, use it for your own advantage. So that's apparently what he was trying to do, and so thus his reputation spread. If you want to hire Balaam, if you want somebody cursed or a nation cursed, you hire this man. He can do it for you. All right, verse 7. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the diviner's fee. Diviner would have to do with a seer or even a prophet. Fee would be another word for bribe. In other words, a substantial reward of some kind in their hand. So they'd have to have something to offer to Balaam. And they came to Balaam and spoke to him the word of Balak, the king. And he said to them, lodge here tonight, and I will bring back word to you as the Lord speaks to me. So the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam. Now at this point, we do notice several positives about Balaam. Number one, he knew the Lord, he knew Jehovah. Number two, he possessed sufficient faith and wisdom to consult God about this request, which is always wise to do. And number three, he appeared at least to desire to comply with whatever God said. Nevertheless, one negative becomes, well, maybe not so obvious until you think about it. One negative surfaces. You see, the Moabites and the Midianites were blatant idolaters. They did not believe in Jehovah. They believed in all these false idols and so-called gods. Balaam, because he knew the Lord, knew Jehovah, probably realized that those people from Moab and Midian, were idol worshippers, and knew God did not approve of them, and probably had the feeling that God was not going to approve of any request such idol worshippers made. But instead of just dismissing them outright and sending them back home, he agreed to keep them overnight and to consult with God. Well, we get to verse 9. Then God came to Balaam, and listen to what God asked him, and said, who are these men with you? As if God didn't know. As if God needed Balaam to tell him who was there. No, not at all, folks. God was not asking the question for God's benefit. He was asking the question to get Balaam to confess the identity of those he was entertaining for the night. And of course, Balaam knows better than to try to lie to God. He knows God that well. You can't lie to him and get away with it. So he tells him essentially the truth. So Balaam said to God, Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent to me, saying, look, a people has come out of Egypt. And again, this is Israel, God's people. And I get the feeling, or have the feeling, that Balaam probably realizes that these are God's people. I don't know for sure. But because he knows a lot about God, it would not surprise me that he realized these people come out of Egypt were people who got this far because of God's blessing them. All right. And they cover the face of the earth. Come now, this is the request of King Balak. Curse them for me, perhaps I shall be able to overpower them and drive them out. Verse 12. And then God says to Balaam, and you know, I'm tempted to do this. I know I shouldn't, but you can almost read between the lines here. God is saying, Balaam, and again, this is just, I think, the sense of it. Balaam, you should know better. Seriously? Seriously? You asking me to cooperate with the will of this idolatrous, wicked king and his ambassadors? Well, anyway, what God does say that we know, you shall not go with them. It's like, Why would I send you with idolatrous people? I think God is really trying to communicate that. All right, you shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they're blessed. These are my people. I mean, do you think they just got this far by luck or coincidence? And I think Balaam had an idea about that. No, you don't go. You don't curse. These are blessed people. And God could not have been any clearer than that. But there was a problem with Balaam. He had his ears on God. He had his eyes on the bribe, the reward. You'll see this throughout the story. He's basically trying to serve two masters. He's trying to serve God, Jehovah God, and he's trying to serve that reward. Jesus said you can't do that, Matthew 6:24. You can't serve God and mammon or money. You have to pick. He just didn't want to choose. Nonetheless, at least he knew better than to defy God. So he ostensibly complies. I say ostensibly, intentionally, because it's an apparent compliance. As you'll see, verse 13. So Balaam rose in the morning and said to the princes of Balak, go back to your land. Good. For the Lord has refused to give me permission to go with you. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? Isn't he doing exactly what God said? No. Not entirely. You've heard the expression that a half-truth is essentially a half-lie. Do you know that's exactly what's happening here? You see, he didn't divulge everything God told him. He should have said, God has told me not to go with you and not to curse those people. In fact, they will be blessed. Did Balaam say all of it? No. Why? You know, he's trying to keep the door open here. I mean, he's saying, okay, I can't go with you now, but maybe down the road we can work something out. Folks, he's got his eye on the reward. And based on the half-truth, well, partial truth, he at least told part of what God said, as you'll see when the ambassadors go back to Balak, the king, that's exactly how he interprets it. He's interpreting, oh, Balaam's left the door wide open so I can still try to work this thing out with him. And again, the reason Balaam wants that door open, he's got his eye on that reward. Verse 14. By the way, the love of money is the root of all evil, 1 Timothy 6, verse 10. It truly is. Verse 14. And the princes of Moab rose and go back. Went to Balak and said, Balaam refuses to come with us. Now notice, that's all they say. Nothing else. He just refuses. Which left Balak with the impression, oh, okay, he's holding out for a bigger incentive, a bigger bribe. And that's exactly what Balak the king thinks, as you'll see in verse 15. Then Balak, and he doesn't give up. No need to. There's a door open here. Balak again sent princes, more numerous and more honorable than they. He ups the ante. He makes the possible reward much more lucrative. And they came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, the son of Zippor, please let nothing hinder you. Like fear that your reward won't be great enough? Let nothing hinder you from coming to me, for I will certainly honor you greatly. Oh, do I have something in store for you. In fact, he goes on in the message, and I will do whatever you say to me. Which is another way of saying, I'll write you a blank check. You just come and curse this people. That's what the message is. Therefore, please, come, curse this people for me. So these greater ambassadors go back to Balaam. Verse 18, then Balaam, after they tell him what the king said, answered and said to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, stop right there. That's exactly what Balaam wants. I want some of that silver. I want some of that gold. And maybe if I do him this favor, he might even give me his house. And you know what? Then I'll have nothing to worry about ever again. This is the big score. This is the one I have been waiting for. And somehow, maybe I can finagle this. But he goes on. And he probably says this a little more quietly. He said, I could not go beyond the word of the Lord. No, maybe a little more forceful. I could not go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do more or less or more. Now, folks, that's a great answer. It really is. And it sounds like Balaam is 100% loyal to God here, but that's deceiving. You see, had he really been 100% loyal to God, he would have sent them packing that very moment and said, God has given the answer. You don't go with them. You don't curse the people. These people are blessed. Oh, no, Balaam, he's got that door open for a reason. He was looking forward to them coming back. Now, verse 19. And then he shows his true colors. Listen, he says, now, therefore, please leave. No, please, you also stay. Stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me. Read, maybe changed his mind. Maybe I'll get a different answer this time. And you want to say, Balaam, what part of don't go and don't curse do you not understand? Didn't God tell you that? Oh, Balaam understood. He just didn't like it. You know, we may not always like what God says to us. But folks, if God says it, that settles it. I would be a liar if I told you that I love, cherish every commandment God gives, because there's some, folks, I don't exactly care for. But that's not important. Oh, what's important is, am I going to do it or not? That's all that's important. But again, getting back to Balaam, the real issue here is this reward. He wants it. And with that reward at stake, Balaam, literally, he's thinking, well, I shouldn't say literally, I can't judge the man, but I believe he's thinking, how would we put it? If at first you don't get the answer you want, then pray again. It's kind of like playing, roulette with prayer. Thinking you spin it, and if it doesn't end up on the number you want or the color you want, you just spin it again. And keep spinning until hopefully it comes up on your number where you get the big payout. You get the reward. And folks, understand that he's really trying to manipulate God here. But God knows that. God knows that totally. All right, well, we continue. They spend the night just as Balaam has invited them to do. Verse 20, so God came to Balaam at night. This is interesting, what God says. And said to him, if the men come to call you, understand, God knows they're there. There's no if about it. But the way he puts it to Balaam is very intentional. I don't know all of God's will, what he had in mind. I'm guessing a little bit, but I think you can see the pieces of the puzzle coming together. God wants Balaam to think that his manipulation is affecting God a little bit. That God is almost a little naive here. That God doesn't even know that these messengers are there. So God is saying, well, if they happen to come, then here's what you do. So, but what God then says, what he's to do, God's very firm on, as you'll see. All right, so if the men come to call you, and then Balaam gets what he wants, rise and go with them. Oh, is Balaam excited now? Man, this is more like it. I spun the roulette wheel again, and oh, there's my number. But God's not done. Only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do. And if Balaam hears, and he knows he better agree. He knows better than not to agree. But, he's still thinking, well, there's a chance. There's a chance. God has at least opened the door to let me go. And he may just say, once I go, okay, Balaam, curse the people. Balaam doesn't know yet what God's going to say in the end here. So Balaam, I don't think he sleeps a wink after that. So Balaam rose in the morning. I have a feeling it's mighty early. Saddled his donkey. He's excited. He sees the money and went with the princes of Moab. Now, we're going to skip for right now. We will come back either next week or 2 weeks from tonight, God willing, verses 22 through 35, which is basically where I got the title of the lesson. But we'll come back to that. And you'll see why we'll come back to it. It'll actually make sense a little later on. So let's go all the way down to verse 36. And we're just going to read a little farther, and then we'll have to pause for tonight. Now, when Balak, the king of Moab, heard that Balaam was coming. Ooh, he's excited now. Balak's coming? Good. He went out to meet him at the city of Moab, which is on the border of Arnon, the boundary of the territory. Then Balak says to Balaam, and he's still a little upset about the fact he didn't come at the first invite. Did I not earnestly send to you, calling for you? Why did you not come to me? In other words, the first time. I've been waiting here now. Am I not able to honor you? I mean, do you think I can't make you wealthy, whatever? And Balaam says to Balak, look, I have come to you. I mean, isn't that what you want? I'm here. Now, have I any power at all to say anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak. Now, that was great. And you have to commend Balaam for saying that, but you also have to understand his heart wasn't in it. I mean, he was saying the right words, but his heart is somewhere else. His heart is, and he's like crossing his finger, oh God, please, let me curse the people. Let me curse the people this time. He wants the money. Well, King Balak had no idea that this is going to blow up in his face. Big time. Well, we'll pause there and continue next week. Do you see now why Balaam is such a fascinating, unique character to study? I mean, he did have some positive attributes. He believed in God. There's no doubt about that. He did, at least to some degree, want to obey God. He spoke to God. God spoke to him. He was a prophet of God. But the negatives handicapped him greatly. And the two, I just want to emphasize tonight, because this is why I'm preaching this. It's for us to learn from. Number one, his love for money. The Bible teaches us time and time again against that. Listen to what Peter says about that. And Peter is going to reference Balaam here. I'm reading from 2 Peter 2 and verse 15. He's describing the wicked, past, present, and future. And he says, they have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages, literally reward, of unrighteousness. So many people will do almost anything if there's enough money, if there's enough incentive in it. Jude says the same thing, essentially, in Jude verse 11. Woe to them, speaking of the wicked, for they have gone in the way of Cain, have run greedily in the error of Balaam for profit. Folks, you try to serve God and mammon and you will fall every time. And Jude knew people who were trying to do that. And Paul to Timothy, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition, for the love of money is the root of all evil. We need to be careful. The Hebrew writers told us that we need to be content with such things as we have. Not be looking for something greater and bigger, because we can fall into that trap. And we really do need to be careful, because of all countries on the face of planet Earth, there are not many that match us in terms of putting the emphasis on the material, on things. Isn't that right? And I know it firsthand. And the second problem with Balaam, he had more, we'll address those in coming lessons, but the tendency to look past God's commands when they conflicted with his own desires. I didn't say ignore or even overlook. But he really wanted to go around God's commands if he could get by with it. If he had something he really wanted. In other words, he didn't listen to God that carefully if there was something else he had in mind. And folks, we need to beware of that. I've spoken to Christians through the years. And I'm not saying this has never applied to me, because it has. In which something came up in the conversation that was wrong. That was just wrong. Just against God's law. Against the words of Jesus Christ. And sometimes in those conversations you say, well, don't you know this is wrong? And you know the person is struggling spiritually. When the first word, when you say, don't you know this is wrong? And the first word is, but what? But what? Is it wrong? But what? And that was Balaam's, other than his desire for profit. That was his problem. Yes, I'm going to do what God says. I'm going to say what God says. But, and that got him in trouble. Well, thank you so much for listening tonight, and we will continue this lesson, God willing, next Sunday night. If there's anyone here who is struggling spiritually, most of you who are adults here are Christians. And thank God for that. If there's anybody who might need to obey the gospel, though, who needs to, or anybody who needs our prayers tonight, please come and let us know by coming up forward here, and we'll announce it. We'll pray for you. If you need to, would you come as we stand and sing the song of invitation?